Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recollection Step, a Grand Archive TCG podcast, part of the Maindeck podcast family. I'm Dan.
And I'm Taylor. Again, thanks for listening. Today, we're going to be talking about how those who cannot do coach.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
As we go over Dan's excellent trip to Singapore. I assume it was excellent. I actually haven't asked you about it yet.
It was dope. Yeah.
Yeah. But also, unfortunately, scrubbed out after 3-3 on day one.
Yep.
But, I mean, listen, these things happen. We've all been there. Dan, before we even get into any of that, what was your favorite part about Singapore besides Grand Archive?
Kaya Toast.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, good answer.
Kaya Toast is insane. Yep. It sounds like that you're going to think they're lying to you. I told the hooligans in our Discord servers about the Kaya Toast, and I got the response of, it's just toast. Like, why do you care? It's good. It's good stuff.
It's Kaya Toast. It's not toast. For those of us who are ignorant, what is Kaya Toast?
It's basically, Kaya is like it's a coconut jam, basically. And I don't actually normally like coconut as a flavor. I don't know. Just my tongue, it doesn't like it too much for some reason. But I didn't taste any of the thing I normally dislike about coconut in this. So they toast ideally some decently crispy toast, and then they will put a layer of Kaya on it, and then cold butter. That's the important part. And it is it's just a little delight. It's a treat for your mouth, which is normally where you have treats. It's great.
That is normally where you have treats. You're right. Good call, Dan. Thank you.
You learn a lot on this podcast.
How many times do you have Kaya Toast over the week?
I had it 3 times. And actually the third time I was actually feeling like maybe I shouldn't have this every single day. I wanted to. That was my initial plan. But the third one was like, this is kind of sweet. And it was like the day of, I think it was day 1. And I was like getting a little bit of nerves. I'm like, it's not doing today. But they also normally serve it with a particular kind of coffee. I just had them jam a bunch of milk in it so I could drink it. That was good.
Nice.
Oh no, I totally missed an important part. They also serve it with soft-boiled egg. Okay, that part's critical.
Oh,
okay, because you don't. Taylor thinks I'm referencing an internal meme of ours about cough egg, which is the greatest drink that no one has, where you crack an egg into a hot cup of coffee and poach the egg in the coffee, and then drink that, which is. That's
exactly where you were going. It took me like a minute to put that two together, but I got so excited. So you're telling me they don't have coffee egg in Singapore?
Well, you could put the soft boiled egg into the coffee if you wanted to. I think if you went to Singapore, went to the toast place and did that, I think you would get a lot of weird looks.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go ahead and recommend that you do that. Anyways, you can have a good coffee egg.
Well, it wouldn't poach the egg very well because it's already cooked. So.
No, I know. You wouldn't get that. You missed that part. But the point is, with that soft-boiled egg, you break the yolk with the toast, and you dip the toast into the egg, and eat that, and that adds this kind of warm, yolky egg to it. It's just it's just a good mix. It's great.
Why do you keep pronouncing it that way? Isn't it just yolk?
This is not the first time. Look, you can pronounce the L. It's legal. It's right there.
Okay.
I think it's a dialect thing.
What are we talking about today, Dan?
Oh my God.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Yeah, we can get this back on track.
Back on track.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So you had some fun in Singapore. Your wonderful wife went with you, I think, as well. Is that correct? Did she have a good time?
Wife came with. Yeah, it was really cool. She was really excited just to try some of the food there also. And We went to Orchard Road, which is a place in Singapore. It's like, here's something about Singapore. You can walk in any building. I swear to God, you can walk in any single building and you are in a shopping mall. They just all are shopping malls. I mean, and we're on Orchard Road, which is known for its shopping, but like, I swear we would just get off at a train station, walk out a shopping mall, walk in like the place next to our hotel. We just walk in shopping mall, connected to the train station, of course, connected to the expo center. It's just a mall. There's just malls everywhere. I don't know, felt like it at least. But that was kind of cool. Seeing Orchard Road is one cool thing about Singapore is that it's like they really, really take good care of, I mean, just like the general cleanliness of everything of all of the sidewalks and roads and bathrooms and everything there. They really try to keep it clean, and they really take care of the foliage and all the plant life everywhere. And they try to put a lot of like green everywhere. And it makes it it is really a beautiful place. I really want to go back sometime and maybe not to an Ascent, right? And just like have time to look around. Although Ascent's really fun too. So
yeah, I mean, Ascents are great, but yeah, I've heard really good things about Singapore as well. And I think if you went during not an Ascent, if anybody went during not an Ascent, they would have a really good time from what I've heard. So
yeah, it was cool.
Awesome. I'm glad you guys had a really good time. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm disappointed you scrubbed out, but it is what it is. It happens to everybody. At least you had the chance to kind of go and compete on the international stage. So that was kind of sweet.
Is it too soon for my like big takeaway for the weekend, or should I save that to the end or right now?
Is your takeaway about how you're wrong, or is it
no? We'll talk about that later.
Let's do it right now. Yeah, no, it's fine.
We'll talk about that later. My big takeaway from this weekend was I was the only member of the Maindeck team to go there, and that really hurt me. I felt like that was what really kind of did me in. I felt like not going to one of these events with a team, doing sort of the lead up practice together. Like we tried, like we did some Maindeck. Mitch came and helped for a while. We had Taylor, we were bouncing ideas off a lot, but you've been busy with house moving stuff, so we haven't had a lot of time to really connect. But all of that stuff, and then not having that like the night before, just like deep playtest session, the 11 o'clock switch to erupting, whatever. Like, but not having all of that, just kind of practice and teamwork, and just I was missing out, and I felt like, especially if I'm going to travel that far to compete in Ascent, to do so on my own is sort of just a less optimal experience, I guess. It is giving myself a lower chance, I think, of succeeding. So my big takeaway from the weekend was that ideally, whenever I go to an Ascent to compete, I want it to be with some members of our team. And I think it's important for people out there watching, if you want to play the game competitively, I think one of the best things you can do is lock in with a group of people who are like-minded, who you can play test with, who you can meet at events, even if they're not in your local area. We have part of the Maindeck team is totally different places. We have people in all the East Coast, largely.
East Coast. Well, don't forget our friends in Northwest Arkansas as well.
Yeah, Arkansas too. Arkansas, East Coast. And we used to have one from Arizona, but he moved up here now, so that's good. Eventually, we'll get the others to move up here too, I bet. Probably not, but even if people are spread around, being able to go to these events together is like it's such an advantage. And there were little things that could have been caught, like I found out that I didn't have a Covenant of Thorns. It was in my deck list. It was not in my deck box, and I got through round 1 without even noticing, and then round 2, I was playing against a Tristan match, and I was like, okay, I got this. I'm going to build the wall. I just got to stay safe so I can slime off, go to town. So I go Quicksilver Grail. Let me grab my I guess Verdant Scepter, because my Covenant of Thorns is not here. And I lost that round. And I really, it might have been different if I had Covenant of Thorns, really. I might have not lost that.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's from big things. Well, I don't know what's the big and the little thing in this scenario, but it's from big things to little things, whether that be playtesting with the team, and shoring up your deck list and everything, to actually just doing some early prep and making sure, oh, hey, look, Dan, you forgot your Covenant of Thorns. Now I have to mail back a Covenant of Thorns to Caban, who was kind enough to loan me one for the rest of the event. So my deck could match my deck list.
Excellent. Well, what a guy.
Yeah.
Speaking of Caban, he won the whole thing again. So we have the first ever repeat champion of a major Grand Archive event. So that's pretty sick. Congrats to Caban.
Yes, huge congrats. The team, Caban's team, True Champion Gaming, cleaned up that weekend. Caban took first, and then the team took second in Path of Silver as well.
Jeez.
As well as winning, they placed in 2 Thema categories. They won one of them.
Oh my gosh.
Although the person who accepted that Thema award, I don't think they're a normal member of the team. I don't know what was going on with that one.
He won the Philippines regional the weekend before as well, right?
Yeah, Caban was back-to-back champion. Philippines regional into Ascent Singapore. It was insane.
Wild. So my question here is it too soon to start calling Caban the faker of Grand Archive? And for those of you who are maybe younger or just not into esports, Faker is the single greatest League of Legends player of all time. And Caban is very, very quickly cementing a case for himself here.
I'd say Caban has the credentials to call him easily to call him the best GA player in the game. I think there are a lot of really skilled players at Grand Archive. And Singapore was. I've been telling this to people too, and I do say partially to make myself feel better, but also because I do think it's true. Singapore had probably the hardest gauntlet of players to get through of any Ascent, because it was a lot of the major names from the US did go there. Like you had to deal with both Caban and Isaac. Terry stayed back, but Caban and Isaac were both there contending. Duck Hats was there. Eason Chen was there. Like some big names from the US were there. And then Australia, New Zealand area sent a bunch of Creative Shock. You had to deal with Lime, and Lime's wife were both there. Glenny Boy, world champion Glenny Boy was there to keep people too.
Who I think won Ascent Auckland, or was that?
Sorry, I talked when you said the name.
Blue Sky Candy.
Oh, Blue Sky Candy. Yeah.
I think they are the winner of Ascent Auckland, or at least they were in the top 8. If somebody else won, I'm sorry. I mean, there's just like an incredible amount of names. Like this feels very much like a kind of a quote unquote pro tour level event.
And I just don't want to leave out that the SEA region players there were extremely strong too.
Yes.
We had Fugitive from True Sight was cleaning up. He did really well at the Philippines regional too, and was cleaning up there. Pro-An, a big name from Worlds too, who was really he was in I think he was top 8. I think he was competing pretty well. Or no, maybe he got knocked out of top 8. Shoot, at Worlds. I think he might. I think he got knocked out.
No, Pro-An took 3rd actually.
Oh, he took 3rd. Okay, I'm thinking of someone else.
Alec is, I think, who you're maybe thinking of.
Oh yeah, that's
But
yeah, the players. The Gauntlet was insane, dude. It was like basically this was Worlds 2. It felt like it. It was just everyone was there who you didn't want to see, and they were on some good decks, man. It was tough. It was a tough Gauntlet. So to anyone who went to Singapore and scrubbed like me, I don't know, don't feel too bad. I guess I'm trying not to, because like it really was the hardest Gauntlet. To everybody who made even top 32 at this event, this is probably the hardest event to day 2 of any Ascent. So everyone there should feel so good about themselves. I know, like I was talking to Brightwing a lot too, who was like, he said this was his, I might remember he's been to just about every Ascent. He maybe missed one of them, I think. And he finally day 2'd this one. And I was like, dude, this is the one to day 2. Like me day 2ing Houston was like, nobody even knew how to play the game at that point. Right. It was like, it means so little compared to getting to Singapore and then day 2ing it. It's insane. So yeah, shout out to, everybody we named and everyone we forgot to, because there were a ton of people there, but
yeah, if you can find the Omnidex event for this and you just are looking at the participant list, by the way, it's just everybody until like, number 69. Nice. Has either an Ascendant, Platinum, or like a high gold icon next to their name. So just a lot of people who've been playing the game for a while and are very good at the game. So this looks like just a grueling gauntlet. And yeah, I mean, with a lot of like really good American players showing up, with Oceania right there, essentially. I mean, not right there, but it's more right there than a lot of the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
A lot of their top players showing up, and then of course, SEA has no shortage of great players as well. Just being there to like play against those players and have that experience would have been insane, even if you were like Dan and scrubbed out, after a few rounds. Like just getting to play against those top ranked players is a ton of fun and a great way to like grow at the game. So I'm just gonna be repeating this most of the episode, but I'm super jealous of everybody that went because it sounds like it was a ton of fun.
Yeah, and Taylor, you and I, and myself now, especially it had been a while since I got to actually play in an event. My last major event to play in was Nationals. So it had been a little bit for me, but getting back into it and playing, even scrubbing out, I think you and I are now on the same wavelength now. Like if there was an Ascent this weekend, I would be hyped and going. If there was one, I just want to go play Ascents. I want to go play high level Grand Archive really, really badly right now.
Yeah. I'm supposed to like move out of my house this weekend. And if there was an Ascent in like per se Minneapolis, right? On this weekend, I would be doing everything in my power to get out of moving out of my house to go play in this Ascent. That's like how hyped up I am about this in general. And yeah, it's exciting to hear you kind of get back into it again. Because like March was the last time you really had a huge like event where you're really playing Nationals, right? So that's 7 months.
It's too long,
almost. So
we're gonna make sure it's never that long again.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. So the thing that is, I think, on everybody's minds at this point after this event is, we had all these top players show up. We had a lot of like people who are really good at reading metagames and making good metagame choices. And we had what a lot of people beforehand would have called the best deck in the room. But looking through this top 32, there's not many copies of that so-called best deck in the room. So Dan, what happened to Slimes?
Yeah, let's talk about this. And this is in the title of the podcast and everything, because I think this is our big point of discussion here. But the data for Singapore and what I believe here, by the way, is that I believe there are certain elements and things that go into this, which can certainly make this maybe, possibly more of an aberration. But my belief is that we're seeing the refinement of a metagame rather than just an aberrant metagame. And as the metagame has gone on, we have seen, you can actually look back and look at Slime's conversion rate at all of the 100+ player events, and it's a decrease over time in their conversion rate. 24% conversion rate at Chicago, 24% conversion rate at NorCal as well. Very, very Slime heavy metagame there. But then we had the Philippine regional where it was only 16% conversion rate. And then at Singapore, Slime's down to 8% conversion rate. 87 Slime players who made day one. 7 of those 80 Slime players packed it up and didn't go to day 2. I was one of 80 people who didn't make it in, who played that same deck, and only 7 actually made it in to day 2, which is remarkable. And then in top 8, 1 Slime player. He happens to be the one who wins, who is there's a Caban factor there, right? There's a play skill factor. We're, by the way, Taylor, I'm telling you right now, and telling the audience as well, a future episode of this podcast is going to be entirely dedicated to talking about win rates and player skill and that whole system, how I think, at least how we think maybe you should think about that. Good that, when you're judging, you're looking at Fractal of in.site, or probably our favorite new Grand Archive website.
Oh my God. I'm always looking at this website, and I know the data sets are small and stuff, but it's just like, it's a lot of fun just to see the numbers.
Data is beautiful. Even when the data sets are small, what that data sets being small gives us a lower confidence in data, but it doesn't mean we can't find trends, right? And make estimations about it.
Actually, hold up. Before we go any further, I want to say, if anybody knows who's maintaining the site or whatever, and putting all this awesome work into it, if you know who they are, tell them we say excellent job. And of course, we're telling you right now, if you're listening to this podcast, excellent job. But I just want to make sure whoever is maintaining this feels appreciated, because this is an excellent resource for the community.
I adore this site.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, so we get to the Singapore metagame and we see just a really interesting drop in Slime's conversion rate. Slime's just unable to make it in there when a lot of people, and I said this directly to so many people, what are you playing, Dan? Slimes. It's the best deck. I'm playing it's just the best deck. Okay. My feeling on that I think that's still true to say from certain perspectives and certain angles, but I think my feelings on it are a lot more nuanced now. Yeah. Having seen the metagame, seen some of the developments people have made, and really just seeing what has happened as players. I think one thing too is players have just learned, and refined the other decks in the format. Mm-hmm. Playing Slimes is not a shoo-in to winning anything at all. Yep. So let's just run through these numbers really quick, and then I think that gives a good kind of baseline to talk about what's going on and sort of our final snapshot of the metagame.
Yes. So to start with, Slimes, they had 87 out of the 281 decks in the room. This is the highest representation of Slimes we've seen yet. So like, it's just huge. Yeah. And then of course, the only 7 made day 2, so an 8% conversion rate. The next largest representation in the event was Merlin at 54 decks. Only 4 of those made day 2, so a very similar conversion rate to Slimes, which I don't think is really surprising anybody at this point. Like, that's a very Merlin, I think, is kind of in a weird spot in the metagame. We'll get into it a little bit later, but we've kind of seen Merlin's conversion drop steadily through the format as well. And then Wind Allies and Tristan were the next represented. I didn't have the stats mathed out for them to say like how many decks there actually were, or what their conversion rate was, just because I think they're still good decks. I wasn't as excited about seeing them, or and like they're fine. They're cool decks. But
Taylor won store champs with Win Tristan and then decided he's never touching that deck again, including when he's doing analysis for the podcast.
Exactly. Yep. And it's not even because I don't like the deck. I think the deck is actually a lot of fun. It's just, there's cooler decks like Merlin and Nico. Speaking of Nico, that is the next represented. 19 showed up to the event. 5 of them converted, which is a pretty great conversion rate there. Then we had Water Allies show up again. They've been making a resurgence. 16 showed up to the event. 3 converted to day 2. We had some aggro decks. Again, I don't have numbers on them because like aggros are just always kind of there. It's I'm not trying to talk down on aggro. I wasn't trying to talk down on like Allies and Tristan either. They're just like Allies and aggro, and decks like Tristan and Merlin are just going to be ever present kind of parts of a lot of these metagames, because they're either kind of like straightforward decks that are easy to pick up, or introduce new players to the game, or there's like popular characters like Tristan and Merlin are just like, people love those characters, so they're going to be playing those decks forever. So they'll just be showing up regardless. And I mean, that doesn't mean you shouldn't leave them out of your metagame analysis. They just weren't anything I was like trying to highlight today. And then after aggro, Fire Aggro Luxem looks like it's also kind of storming back onto the scene, with 10 showing up to the event and 2 making day 2. So another really good conversion rate there. So anyway, those are your numbers. Dan, what do you take away from these?
I think it's, we throw the conversion rates out there a lot, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything to people unless you have the context for what this means. So just to be really clear, I'm going to get a really, really bottom level, like baseline. Conversion rate, of course, means the percentage of the decks that were played in the event that made the whatever cutoff, in this case, the day 2 is what we're talking about. So if they're
top 32.
Top 32. Yep. So 87 Slimes, 7 of them made day 2. That's 8% of them made day 2. So it's an 8% conversion. So just throwing the numbers out there, unless you kind of have a context to ground yourself with, doesn't make a lot of sense. But you want to think about it this way. So Nico, which is what I've been saying is the deck, if I had retrospective knowledge and with the event, I would have probably prepared Nico to play instead. gotten a little bit more experience and skill piloting it, doing a little more testing, and then run that in, because Nico had 19 people play it, 5 made day 2, 24% conversion. 24% conversion for any deck is very high. That's insane. That is a pretty insane conversion rate. Especially when you consider, and it wouldn't have worked out exactly this way, because there would have been a bunch more mirror matches and stuff. But if there were 4 times as many Nico players, which wouldn't have even equaled the number of Slime players, if that conversion rate stayed consistent, which, like I said, it would drop a little bit, but if it stayed consistent, that meant day 2 would have been 20 Nico decks and then 12 other decks, and people would be complaining that there's a Nico problem in the game.
Yes. Yep. Another like kind of baseline comparison we can make too is that our cutoff is top 32 here, and there were 281 decks in the field, so that means about like 11% of those decks you would expect, or 11% of the participants can day 2, right? So the just of the field, your baseline conversion is 11%. So anything that's hitting above that threshold is doing really well, and anything that's hitting under that threshold is probably like underperforming a little bit.
Yeah, that is a great that's a great line to think of, just like how many percent of players just make it into day 2 anyway. So what we see is Nico, Luxem, and Water Allies all outperforming that line, but particularly Luxem and Nico being kind of the most impressive ones to make it in. Luxem is really interesting because Luxem had only seen fringe results. We'd had a couple top cuts at some bigger events lately, but a lot of that was sort of an uncertainty, like, oh, did they, were their matchups just good? Were they just dodging particular matchups, dodging slimes or something all day? But now, again, Fractal of In site. I'm going to have the link in the description here because we're looking at this a lot and it's just useful. You can look at this, and they do head-to-head matchup analysis, and you can see that even when Luxem was matching up against some of the matchups that you'd think wouldn't be as good, like slimes, it was not pulling out terrible win rates against them either. Like they were matching them, and they were succeeding at those. And there's a lot to consider about like why that's the case. But Luxem in general had while everyone was focused on Tristan Slimes, Luxem had a sneaky buff now of the Tristan Recollection deck, particularly gaining access to 2 things: Incapacitate, which allowed it to win against long game decks more handily, like Merlin. If it was having trouble drawing its Luxem pieces to close the game out before Merlin could fireball it, it can now incap the fireball, and then Merlin has to find more, and usually that gives the time for Luxem to be able to win. And Slice and Dice is the other one for Luxem to be able to either use it as a control piece to take out 2 things on the board, which helps it against its worst matchups. Xander doesn't care about his prep counters. They're not important to him, other than ideally using the one on Deft Executor to grab a card just for like pure value. But otherwise, if it makes more sense now, Luxem is able to just Slice and Dice when it goes to level 2, gain 2 prep counters going to level 2, Slice and Dice, spending them all, and then take out 2 allies on the board, or just like push damage on someone who's going like, oh, I don't need to level. Ally deck is staying at 15. If they're staying at Spirit because they don't need to level against Luxem, well, you might just die, actually. So Luxem just got a little bit of a sneaky boost. You pair that with some good pilots, and then, as usual, you need to see some decent matchups and stuff throughout the day for every deck. And we have a good Luxem conversion suddenly.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and you can see this too in the final round not in the final round, in the finals match of Singapore. It was Caban versus Bob, and Bob was on Luxem, and that was an excellent matchup. That was a matchup I have long thought is very Slimes favored. I still think it's pretty Slimes favored, but Bob was able to take a game, and a lot of both those games all 3 of those games were very like back and forth. There was a lot of interaction going on. It was pretty crazy. I guess that last one was less close at the end, but anyway, that doesn't matter.
Slime things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it ends up that the Luxem versus Slimes matchup, according to the data we have from Singapore, from the head-to-head, that players that day at least match up 41.9% win rate for Luxem, which is, so it's about a 40-60 matchup, which is certainly favored towards Slimes, but 40% is a winnable win rate as well.
100%. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like you can compare the head to head in the event versus the head to head of just the season overall. And you kind of see these matches become these matchup rates, win and loss rates become more normalized over the course of the season. As players understand kind of what the format's doing, how to play against certain decks and how to tune their decks for the decks they want to beat. So for instance, like we saw, like just from the format overall, Water Allies only has like a 50% win rate against Slimes. In Singapore, that jumps up all the way to 60, right? And we're to be fair, we're working with pretty small data sets, so like that's within the margin of error. But also, it kind of trends up, like, you know, Water Allies kind of figured out how to take on Slimes and beat them fairly successfully with some amount of regularity here, right? Because like a 60-40 win rate is, or 60-40 matchup into like any deck is like that's a very favorable matchup, I would say. It's not like a matchup you're going to win every single time, but it's one I think I would enter in pretty confident, and I wouldn't be wondering like, what do I have to do to sit here and scrape out a win, right? I'm like, okay, I can sit down. I've got a game plan. My primary game plan is what I'm going to go for. It's going to be effective against them, and if they like, you know, figure out a way to fight against that, then I'm going to have to adapt. But for the most part, my game plan is going to be good.
And players too, you know, it's one thing to mention that, which is totally true, that players have refined their decks a lot and their play for that particular deck a lot throughout the season. But another thing that's important to mention is that Slimes has been played enough, right? If you're playing Slimes, the one thing you have to understand is that every single person in that room has tested fairly extensively against you.
Oh yeah.
They know what the slime matchup is, and at this point they very well understand what the weak points are of Slimes and how to beat it. So, for example, that Water Allies player, if they see a Freezing Hail and there's a Baby Gray Slime in play, you cannot be greedy with that Baby Gray Slime, because what'll happen is you will attempt to intercept something with Baby Gray Slime, and then you'll go, I'm a slime player, I'm going to escape the wreckage, my Baby Gray Slime, and then they Freezing Hail the Baby Gray Slime in response because they held it up because they knew that you were going to try to do that, because you didn't just do it on your turn, and you are going to be way disadvantaged in that game suddenly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's
a game losing play.
It is like it's a play that denies Slimes it especially against water. It denies Slimes that value that they need going into the level up turn, which will allow them to be able to play Slimes and not get frostbound. And if you deny that value, then suddenly the frostbinds that the Water Allies player sees are online now. And they're like, okay, now all I have to do is hold up 3 on the turn that they level. And no slime player was respecting it and running Viridian Protective Trinket. I didn't look through all the lists, but it's not common to see Viridian Protective Trinket in the sideboards to respect that, even though Water Allies is the one deck that actually has the green win rate against Slimes.
Yeah, I mean, we're even seeing like Nico get to a more even win rate here against Slimes, where it used to be that like Nico almost felt like a free win for Slimes. And a lot of that is because like Nico is leaning into his strength as a water deck to take advantage of Slimes. Excuse me. Pardon me. As they go to their level 3 turn, they're finding tech in Blinding Orb to make these slime players' hand smaller so that their frostbinds are more effective when their cerulean decrees are more effective.
The Blinding Orb, for the players who weren't aware, it destroyed players that day because they put Blinding Orb out, and then when the player tried to level to 3, they just lost their entire turn, and they lost their ability then, because as soon as they leveled to 3, Blinding Orb popped, cards down, and then if you try and play your free slime, it gets frostbound. Yeah. It's so rough.
Yes. Yeah. And so now, anyway, that all just kind of goes to say that as now that Slimes had, you know, such a target on its back, people have been spending a lot of time trying to find ways to actually beat it, right? Because like, you know, people were trying for the longest time just not to play Slimes. You know, we saw Caban like stick to Tristan forever, right? And he finally caved here in the last few weeks, started playing Slimes. And people are like, you either have to join it or you have to find a way to win against it. And we're seeing a lot of people still try and find ways to win against it, and they're being very successful, which is another reason where we're seeing like Slime's conversion rate here drop, and just overall like the power of the deck is going down. Like Dan said, Slimes also just was not respecting these water plays. They weren't playing Viridian Trinket. Slimes already kind of has a tough time like adapting their material deck for a lot of this, because it's a very tight material deck.
It's tight. Yeah.
So like you can't really respect everything as slimes anyway. Although a lot of these slimes lists are pretty greedy. They don't respect anything. Well, I mean, we saw that in Chicago as well. Well, when Matt Garcia was able to just go, just go to town on these slimes lists with erupting. None of them were playing Nullifying Lantern, despite it, erupting actually having a pretty good matchup into slimes. So like, again, like just as a slime player too, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh no, I've got the best deck in the room and now it's not the best deck because everybody's gunning for it. Well, you still have a really good deck. Dan and I, we disagree on where it lies in the metagame currently and kind of where it may be trending, but there's still a lot of play to that still. Like if you want to respect these water decks, you can. If you want to respect erupting decks, you can. There's way to, like, just the same way that the metagame has shifted to attack slimes. Slimes can also shift to kind of see where its problems lie and short its matchups as well.
Let me put out just some numbers here, and again with a grain of salt, small data set, whatever. But I just think it's interesting to look at. I'm going to put out some numbers here, and the numbers are going to make a case against slimes as the best deck in the format. And then what I want to do is talk about why slimes is still in some ways the best deck in the format. So we're going to do a little
before we do that. Actually, Dan, when you say best deck in the format, what do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I was actually going to get to that later, but that's totally fine. So best deck in the format is, I think it's a really difficult thing to actually define. And I think there are different ways to define it. So what a lot of people mean when they say best deck in the format is they mean a pretty simple definition, which is it's the deck with the best win rates. It's the deck that is just going to be able to win the most games most consistently, or is based on what you expect to play against. It will have the best chance of winning those games. That's the simple definition. I think that definition is a little disingenuous, and it isn't always hitting at the heart of things, because it's very rare for, well, I wouldn't say it's very rare. It depends on the game. If you're playing a Bandai game, it's not very rare, but a lot of card games don't have a deck that just, by and large just wins against everything. And it is just the thing that you obviously should play because it's obviously the best deck. A lot of card games are designed pretty decently, where if there's a deck that's quite good, there's a deck that's quite good against it. And sometimes it just comes down to how the player base decides to treat this deck. If everybody treats it as that's obviously the best deck, and then the deck that beats it is unplayable, and then everyone just plays that best deck, well, that's a groupthink thing that just caused them to, create that scenario. But then also there's sometimes truth to it, that the decks that beat it are not good against other things, and it's the one to play. So with that in mind, I want to just, what I'm going to start by pushing back against is the simple definition of best deck, which is that this is the deck with the best win rates. So if we look at the Singapore data, we have a pretty interesting, and I'm going to have you just go to fractalevin.site down below. I have a link down below that goes to Singapore, and you click on the head-to-head column to look at all this stuff. But the Slimes deck going across the board had largely, most of its matchups are between 50 and 60% in win rate. So obviously against other Slimes, it had a 50% win rate. Go figure. No, it's literally has to be that way.
Quick aside, actually, that's another reason why like Slimes is going to have, and Merlin actually are going to have lower conversion rates, is because they have more decks in the tournament they can actually day two. So like their conversion rates aren't necessarily artificially deflated. Yeah. But it's a limitation. Like Nico's can have 100% conversion rate, but because Slimes is only at 87, they're stuck at like,
just basically can't do that. Yeah. It's not, I mean, it would be statistically improbable for it to happen. I think it would have to have a really large tournament for it to be possible. Yeah. Because at some point they have to get matched up against each other if they all keep winning. Yes. So yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good point, and why we hopefully people who wanted to comment that down below have listened this far and have noted that we do recognize that there is a limitation to just looking simply at conversion rates as something. But as Taylor mentioned right away, we're just looking at this data and we're making inferences. It's fun and it's interesting, but it's always a grain of salt with everything.
Yes.
So here, I'm not going to go too into detail here, but things like Slimes 50%, Crux 52, Mill 52, Fire Aggro 56. That was actually impressive because Fire Aggro is thought of as quite a rough matchup for Slimes because it can just go too fast. But Slimes they stay at low health, so that Slimes just has to go fast enough, see Dungeon Guide, and they can close the game.
Well, and Gather Slimes does so much work in that matchup. Gather Slimes is a horse, like just a huge workhorse.
Yep. Gather Slimes can be, I lost a game because a person in response to my Storm Slime did Gather Slimes and saw 3 slimes instead of 2. And if they saw 2, I won. If they saw 3, I lost. It was a gamble. It was like, I was at the point, that was my last match. I was like, I either win the game on this turn or they got me next turn. So I have to go for it. And I thought they had Slime Shield and I was like, oh no. And they did Gather Slimes. Like, there's a chance. And then he saw 3 slimes anyway. I'm like, all right, fair enough. But yeah, anyway, 56 Fire Aggro, 58 Luxem, 57 Erupting. It starts to get to pretty low numbers after that. But what we see here is that there are very few green matchups listed for Slimes, which is where they mark at 60% or above win rate. And the ones that they do have green are Astra, Neos, and Domains, which are, decks, right?
Yeah, they only played so many matches into them. We just don't have that many data points to even say if it's
if
good or bad in general.
It might
right?
mean nothing.
Yep.
And then they have one red matchup, which was just below 40%, which is against Water Allies, as we mentioned, which that weekend, with 46 matchups there, getting a little more reasonable, that's a bad matchup for Slimes. That's not a great matchup for Slimes to see. Sorry, go ahead.
This is very similar. If anybody's familiar with Magic the Gathering, this is very similar to a deck called Jund. It had very similar win rates across the board, where it had very slight, if any, advantages to most decks in the format, and very few polarizing matchups. Similar to Slimes, I think a lot of players liked Jund because it felt like a lot of it relied on player skill at that point. You had a lot of these matchups. You take this into a tournament, and it feels like you can do really well as long as you are playing at your best and you're playing at a high level, right? However, as Dan's going to get into here, there are some decks in this tournament that had what looks like almost just a row of straight green. Like they had just good matchups against every important deck in the tournament, and this is really where kind of Dan is like, well, Slimes is good, but maybe there was even a better choice. Like this is kind of where Nico's coming into play. So I'll let you get into that, Dan.
I want to riff off what you said there, though. The Jund thing is really appropriate. And the thing that, just to put in Slime's favor a little bit, the thing that Slimes and Jund both do really well is that they are both decks where, your individual win rate gets to play into it more because it's easier to play that deck in optimal level. It's a very forgiving deck. They're both forgiving decks to play, and they are low intensity decks to play. They're decks that do not take, once you understand the basic Slimes line, you understand Baby Gray, Escape the Wreckage, you understand Forest Cake, Baby Green, you get those early lines and you know what you're doing and you know how your level to turn 3 turn works. Level to whatever. I said it. I said there's a jumble of words there, but you guys got the idea. Once you understand how all of those parts work, then no individual match really needs, your full mental power a lot of the time, which allows you to really conserve yourself throughout a long event. Which is how I talked to Caban about that directly. That's something that Caban really appreciated about that deck. He basically got to pace out his power throughout the day, by not having to think too hard about those early turns and really just having to get into kind of the math of where do I find the kill when he gets to level 3. And Jund was very similar. Jund was just Cascade, Bloodbraid, play Bloodbraid Elf, Cascade into whatever. I literally have no control. It's just whatever I hit here. But they're all good because I built the deck, so they're all good. And then you just try to get to Siege Gang Commander, Broodmate Drag. I played a lot of Jund too, by the way. So those decks are quite similar in how forgiving they are and how low intensity they are to play. Well, then just giving you the chance to flex your skill. And you're going to face a lot of mirrors throughout the day. And that's where the skill comes in. It's the mirrors are going to come down to, a little bit of who draws better, but a lot of, I think, who plays to their outs better, which is why you see Caban taking Slimes and taking first at both these events, 2 events in a row. It's something that is inextricably part of what we're talking about. So now, but when we look at the other decks that are being played here, I'm bringing my attention specifically to Mill and Luxem. Mill is a deck, Nico Mill is a deck that if you look through these win rates, if I laid out these numbers for you and didn't tell you which deck I was talking about, you wouldn't actually be sure. Mill, it was at 47.5% against Slimes. Now that's not 50%, but it's a 2.5% difference. It's what I would start to say is a marginal difference at best between those two matchups. So if you're like, well, I don't want to play Nico because I want to be able to beat Slimes. Well, your Slimes deck has almost exactly the same odds, frankly, of winning. Then Crux 48.2, Wind Allies 59.4, just about green against Wind Allies. Against Tristan 57.7. That's a bad matchup for Slimes. That's only at 41% for Slimes. It's quite a bit different for Slimes there, where your Tristan matchup's actually quite good with Nico. As we've talked about for a long time, it's a good advantage for that. Water Allies and Fire Aggro, though, both above 60%. And then some of these smaller decks too, Erupting Arcane Astra, all above 60% as well. Luxem at a 56.2%, like getting close to 60. The matchups across the board for Mill had one red matchup throughout the day, and it's because there was one matchup between Ensol and Mill, and Ensol won, I guess. Yep. So whatever that means, right? You look at this, and I think it's hard to look at the win rates alone and make a case and say Slimes is obviously the best deck, right? What do you think, Taylor?
No, I agree. I think Nico looks like an insane choice for this tournament, right? Like if you are confident in your ability to outplay these Slimes players, you're going to have a really good day. You've got a bunch of coin flips into Slimes. Like you're probably playing Slimes 3 or 4 times throughout the 13 rounds, right? Just based on the number that are there. But man, like the rest of those matchups are spicy. So, that's dope, right? Of course, you only need if you play your Slimes matchups early with Nico, like you play 3 on day 1 and you lose all 3, you're not making day 2, unfortunately. But if you only play 2, if you play 1, you have really good odds at day 2ing, right?
But that's the same thing Slimes has to do, right? Slimes also goes into those as coin flips. And if you just lose your first 3 because they drew Dungeon Guide and you didn't or whatever, then you're also knocked out.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So I mean, like that I think really what this shows too is more so than just like best deck in the format in general. Like we can start talking about like best decks for specific events too, right? Because I think like Slimes is still probably, personally I would still call it the best deck of the format. I wouldn't say it's by an egregious amount. Every format's going to have a best deck. It's so incredibly difficult to balance these formats where you've got 2, 3, 4 decks that are all at exactly the same power level and win rates and all that. Like it's an impossible ask, right? I think Slimes is still probably just the best deck in general. I think that you can pick it up, you can play it well, you can go to events and stuff, have a good time, have a good high win rate, whatever. I think talking about this event specifically, Singapore specifically, like Mill is insane. Like I think Nico Mill was an excellent choice. Looking at these win rates as well, Water Allies also had a lot of green high win rate matchups, specifically into some of the highest represented decks too, as Slimes and Crux and Merlin Crux and Wind Allies, right? Yeah, like Water Allies just beat up on literally 70% of the field. So like Water Allies, I think, was maybe actually even a better deck than Nico for this tournament.
Yeah, quite possibly.
And
you have Luxem. Luxem also has
as well. Yes.
I mean, Luxem is the unique one. I wanted to bring Luxem up as a contrast to where I said that Mill was a deck that had similar win rates across the board to Slimes, but Luxem does not have similar win rates. Instead, Luxem is what you mentioned earlier, Taylor, polarizing win rates instead, where Luxem is low against Slimes and low against Mill, hitting just 40-ish% against both, as we mentioned, not unwinnable, but low. But instead then it makes those up by having green win rates across the board above 60 for Crux, Wind Allies, Shadow Strike, Water Allies, and Fire Aggro. And if you could sit down with a deck and go like, well, if I see any of those decks, I have a really good shot to win the game. And then if I see others, I'm at a 40-60. When we define a best deck, like I said, it's what is the best sort of average win rate. And there's 2 routes to that. There's all of my matchups are pretty decent. I have like one that's bad and the rest are 50 to 60%. And there's a bunch of my matchups are 70% and a couple are 40%. Yep. And when you're deciding between those, like you could average them out, but really it comes down to just what part of the field did you see that day?
Yeah. So like, I mean, I think there's three very clear like front runners for best deck for the event, I would say. And none of those three are slimes.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, like I think that is a great takeaway. It's just like you can look at the conversion rates, you can look at the amount of slimes that just couldn't make it in. And that's not to say that slimes was a bad deck though, right? It was a great choice. It's a great deck. Yep. Clearly a slimes deck won. But that player skill input goes into things for sure. And the thing that I took away too was that after losing, I did lose to Tristan once, but then my other two losses were to slime mirrors. And my personal takeaway was, look, when it comes to slimes, I wasn't going to the 7 being Caban. I wasn't going in. I was going in feeling decent about my slime play, although that last slime round you shouldn't have watched because I felt like a very bad slime player there. I was making some real sloppy mistakes, but I felt okay. But if I'm going to go into a field of 87 slimes and play that same deck, unless I feel like I'm competitive with Caban, I felt like I should be on a different deck, which is why then I looked at these win rates and thought I should have picked, and the one that I liked the most of based on the way the rates work, because it's very similar to slimes and a little more forgiving, it has a lot of play, was the Nico deck for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think too, like if you are in a field of 87 decks that are the same, like if a third of the event you're on that deck, you have to be one of the best players of that deck in the room in order to like have a good shot at day twoing, right? Like if you're a mid slimes player in that field, like you have a really rough day ahead of you to try and convert to day two. Because you're going to be going up against, like, let's say, so there's 87, right? So the middle is 44. Now, if you're the 44th best slime player in the room, like half of your slime mirrors, you're going to be better than somebody, and half of the slime mirrors, you're going to be worse, right? So like already, like you're in, like it's not a good spot to be. You're
already out of top 32. Like there was no chance. It was like literally was impossible.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I think actually like this, like, especially as we see like these decks become a larger part of events too, playing on what might be the supposed best deck and like just the general best deck in the format might not actually be the best way to convert to day two or top 8 at the event, because you just like the odds are just so against you. Like at that point, that's when you really have to see, like, is there another way I can kind of take advantage of this format and, you know, find myself an acceptable matchup against this really highly represented deck, or, you know, if you find a favorable matchup, then you're in great shape. And while, like, you know, destroying the rest of the field, or do I have to like kind of, you know, do I have to up my game? You know, what do I have to do here? So, yeah, I mean, there's just like a lot of things that go into play here when we're talking about deck selection in general, and best decks in events, best decks in formats, and all that. So,
yeah. And I think I just want to take all of this information, you know, just kind of consolidate it into what I think is a pretty simple statement. We're about to enter Mortal Ambition. We're about to enter.
Before we enter Mortal Ambition, though,
okay,
why don't you help us out at Maindeck and tell our listeners here how they can help support the podcast and the channel?
Oh my God, I was so into our conversation that I forgot I'm supposed to shill. Wow. Thank you, Taylor.
Well, I could tell you were about to transition. So I was like, this is the time.
This is it. Yeah. This is the minute 53 little shill session where I mentioned, if you feel like in this podcast, we've provided you some useful information, you thought that, hey, you know what, this was really worth my time. I'm really glad that Dan and Taylor are making Recollection Step a Grand Archive TCG podcast, part of the Maindeck podcast family, for me to listen to every couple of weeks. You can help us out by liking the video down below, leaving a comment with your thoughts on slimes or the metagame, or what deck you would have brought to Singapore with if you went, or what deck you did bring to Singapore if you did go, and how'd you do? Let us know in the comments down below, all that stuff. That all helps us out a ton. Make sure you subscribe to Maindeck. Get a lot of listeners who aren't. And if you enjoy this, you know, why not? Just toss a little subscribe. It's free to do. It really helps us out. And then when you are, of course, shopping for your next Mortal Ambition cards, or you decided, you know what, it's time, I'm going to become a mill player. Dan convinced me you need to buy some Nico cards. Then you can go to tcgplayer.com and shop for those single cards, but don't just go to that website. Use our affiliate link, bit.ly/shoptcgs. That's bit.ly/shoptcgs. So we get a little kickback on the purchase, which really helps us out as well. So thank you so much for the support in all the ways that you do support us. Now, if I can
also, If you are listening on a podcast platform that is not YouTube, also maybe please consider leaving us a 5-star review, because that's also free and very helpful for all of our discovery needs here.
So. I sometimes I just get on a roll with what I'm saying that I leave it out, because I'm like, it'll break my flow to say that part.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
I'm here to break my flow. Let's go.
Exactly. All right. So
anyway,
I
want to encapsulate everything, right?
Yeah, we're wrapping up everything here. We're saying goodbye to Azoth, right? We are AMB's Mortal Ambition is on just around the corner. If you're listening to this on release, and Dan released it on time,
I did this time.
We've got 1 week left until Immortal Ambition drops on us, and just actually, I think it's going to just completely upheave the metagame here.
I think so too.
There's a ton of stuff, but looking at the kind of final glimpse of Mercurial Heart and the metagame for this set, I am extremely happy with how this has turned out. Like, we have so many decks in the field that are very viable, very good choices for different events. No matter really how you feel about Slimes or Merlin or Nico or whatever, right? Like, we had a top 8 from Singapore that was 5 unique decks, right? Slimes, Luxem, Mill, Nico Mill, Water Allies, Merlin, Tristan. So six unique decks.
Yes.
We have a few more showing up in the rest of the top 32 as well. There's not really a huge, dominator or anything like that. We all thought Slimes was kind of going to be a big menace. It's still very, very good, but it's not necessarily like, an egregious deck that is just taking over everything. I think the Stone Scale band nerf actually was very impactful. We didn't really talk about that at all.
It was. I think, Taylor, episode, in a previous podcast, we had said that it's not a big deal and Slimes is still insane. Yeah. And having played a bunch, it is a significant drop in that deck's ability to just burst wins out.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yep. Yeah, I haven't been able to play much since that nerf. So like, I just haven't had a chance to like play against it yet. Much to really kind of get a feel for that, different matchups into Slimes now. But yeah, like just on first glance, I was like, wow, this is kind of meh. But yeah, costing 1 now is kind of a lot. Really slows that deck down.
And actually the only being able to fast activate the next thing you play totally screwed over one of my opponents one game. It was really impactful for them in that game. It was a Slime Mirror, and we were posturing, right? Yep. And that activation just wasn't enough for just the single fast wasn't enough. He needed to be able to get through my stuff. So
I think that's going to be very impactful in the next set as well. A little bit of foreshadowing for the last bit of the podcast here.
Yeah. We'll talk about Mortal Ambition in a sec, but I want to say too that like, I agree totally. I think that whether or not, after we gave you all that information, whether or not you're on the side of Slimes is still the best deck or Slimes is one of the best decks, but it's maybe not the best because of numbers and averages or whatever. It doesn't matter which side of that you fall on. We all think Slimes is good, right? But it's, I think that its position as a menace of the metagame was true at one point, and I'm not arguing that. But I think as time has gone on, like we kind of said earlier, I think it has settled itself into being simply a part of the metagame. Clearly a good deck, clearly a playable deck, and I think under some definitions, the best deck, especially if you're talking about how easy it is to pick up and play this deck, forgiving, decent matchups across the board. It's certainly a deck that in some respects you can say, oh yeah, that like if you need to be particularly skilled to win with Luxem, for example, or something, then that won't be the best deck, even if its win rates are great for the good players. Instead, the deck that you can get to easy win rates without having to put as much into might actually be what would be the best deck for you, right?
Yep.
But all of that considered, there are 6, and actually, I mean, just depending on some other variants, 7 or 8, I think, completely playable decks in this format that could make top cuts with no problem. There are some fringe decks that people are still figuring out. I think like we haven't seen Arasana get there yet. I still don't know that she can.
She might not. We might have gotten a little excited on the last episode, a little ahead of ourselves.
But I think we sandbagged it well enough. It's like, it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't certain that it was going to make it anywhere. And I think it's still like, there might be a breakthrough for the deck, but it is pretty tough. But like Rye is not on here anywhere. And Rye's a deck that randomly spikes tournaments too. And you kind of have to be prepared for. There are actually just a lot of playable decks right now that are all good. And some of these win and Slimes, or no particular deck actually has win rates that are significantly better than any of the other ones. So this is what I consider a great metagame, honestly. Like, it can be a personal taste. Maybe you don't like playing against Slimes or Tristan or whatever. That's fine. But this is a diverse metagame.
Oh, it's insane. Not only that too, like it is like a really fun, like rock, paper, scissors metagame where there's decks that have like good matchups against some, they have bad matchups against others. And it's like the best kind of rock, paper, scissors, because there's like kind of like two concentric triangles. That's not the right word. But you've got like one triangle right here, like right, and then you've got another triangle here, and they overlap, but their points don't touch or anything like that. So like everybody's win rates are kind of going in weird different directions. And for listeners, I was trying to like make some, hand signs for the audience, but
don't worry, none of us understood.
You didn't miss anything.
Yeah,
you didn't miss anything. But yeah, I mean, so like we're in a spot where like it's not just like a 3-deck triangle either. Like you've got a lot of decks that are vying and jockeying for position, and everybody's got different win rates against everybody else. So I think the format in general is like kind of in a sweet place right now. You can have your opinion on Slimes. Like, you guys know me. Personally, I just hate Silvie in the first place. It has nothing to do with Slimes. I was not a fan, right? So like now that she's shown up, Storm Slime is kind of like a personally offensive card to me just because it's put her on the map. So we all know how I feel about Silvie, but like this format is very good, I would say, to put it in the most basic of terms.
Yeah.
And we're seeing decks come back too that have been gone forever. Like Luxem, we thought was a dead deck, coming into Mercurial Heart, and after the first like couple of weeks of the season, it just was not placing anywhere. And now it's coming back and making really strong showings. So like we're seeing like a lot of sweet movement within like kind of tiers of the format as well. So honestly, I think it's too bad that we're getting Mortal Ambition already, because I think there's actually a lot of play left in this metagame.
It's like the metagame just got cracked. It feels like that to me. It's like no. We just got to the good metagame. Everyone figured out how to beat Slimes, and and now we're about to get Jin and Kongming and some insane buffs to other decks. Like Wind Allies might be about to go crazy, like for real.
Yeah.
And there's some there. Yeah. I think we can, like, I want to shout, actually, just kind of note, I noticed the Ensoul player that we mentioned like a couple of times, that was Lime, actually, which kind of rules. I didn't realize Lime was on Ensoul until I looked at this now, but Ensoul is possibly still a real deck too. And there's some Diana decks that were in the fringes, like trying to, like, courageous Dianas that were going up against a field of baby green Slimes and like still managing to hold a reasonable win rate against Slimes too. 50% win rate against Slimes. Like, how'd you guys do that? Baby green Slime destroys Diana. But anyway, yeah, this format was just getting, I think, really, really good. But now, Taylor, we're moving into Mortal Ambition.
Yes. And there's some cool stuff happening in Mortal Ambition. There's cards in here that are almost certainly just going to really like shake up the metagame. The most obvious one is Jin's level 3. Not even talking about the rest of his kit, but like that to me right now is the most possibly meta warping ability on the list. 100%. Yep.
It's crazy.
Yes. At first I saw it, I was like, okay, this is a fun gimmick. But the more I've talked about it, the more I've heard about people playing with like the starter decks in Singapore. And the more you kind of just go through like, turn sequences in your head, you're like, wow, this is just like really cracked.
It's just the fact. And I want to make sure people don't think we're reading this wrong. We totally understand he dies at the end phase. We get it.
Yep. Yeah.
But
100%.
One more turn. How many times have you played a game of Grand Archive and said, I had you on the next turn?
We have a local in town who that's his catchphrase. Actually.
That is his catchphrase. That is Mike's catchphrase. Yep. I had you on the next one. Yep. And you know what? Mike's now looking. Mike just said, he said in our local chat, he's looking at playing Jin. Like, I bet you are. I believe it, Mike. Yeah. It's a great deck for you. It's exactly what you want.
I look at Jin here and I'm like, how does Slimes beat Jin, right? Especially with the Stone Scale Bandit nerf, right? We talked earlier how you can only play one card at fast speed now. With that, I mean, your Storm Slime better kill him on his end phase, because you only get the one Storm Slime. And that's it. And then you've got to figure out how he doesn't just murder you with things like his Exia pole arm that hits you for like 1 million because he has 1 million damage counters. And and there's cards in here that just say like deal 20 damage to somebody for whatever reason. Okay, this is not verbatim, but
no. I mean,
he hits really hard.
He
hits really hard.
I saw an attack for 19 from Jin. I saw like 19 you like, okay, that wins. And I personally executed a cleave on the board for 12, which is enough to take any slime board state you've ever seen and just delete it and win the game.
Yeah.
It's pretty, they're pretty remarkable plays, and they're highly material deck focused as well. So if anything's going to happen in the metagame, if any Jin decks find any modicum of success, which I think they will, I'm personally like, I was really Kong Ming pilled right away, but now I'm like, no. I'm really going to be messing around with Jin. I've got a few ideas for some decks that I think are going to be really, really sick. And if Jin sees any amount of success then in the format, is able to get those out. Number one, decks that are relying on bursty turns to close the game, of which Slimes is one, Rye is one, Luxem is one too. These are all decks that are going to have to find a way to contend with Jin. Luxem, thankfully, Luxem has the best odds because they have Caliburn and they can just silence Jin, so he dies now. Ooh. which is spicy.
That is spicy.
That's spicy.
That's sick, actually. Oh, okay. Because I mean, so they have that, and then Light Waver's assaults are already at fast speed.
Yep.
So like they already have answers to it anyway. But like if you just get a good position, you're just like, yeah, I'll Caliburn you, and sorry, bud, you don't get the extra turn. That's sweet. I like it a lot.
It is fast speed already, but it's important just to note that you still have until the end phase, right? So it's like they have to find that kill at the exact perfect time, and if they don't kill you the turn you level to 3, you're gonna for sure have until the next turn, right?
Yep.
So
yes.
It's all that's really good. And then the other thing is a lot of Jin's powerful cards are regalia that are 1 cost, right?
Yep.
So it's going to be an interesting thing. If Jin's really good, people are going to have to adapt to actually throw out the reduced to ash. I know the fast speed's great. I believe I agree it's awesome, but Spurn to Ash is your new best friend, okay? Yes. Because this actually deals with the pole arm. It deals with the breastplate, which is like insane card advantage if you let Jin sit with that, plus makes him harder to kill. Yep. It's stuff. There's stuff you have to get off the board now.
We were just seeing Alcahest's praises last episode. Alcahest sucks now. Alcahest blows.
Terrible.
Get it out. Take it out of your deck. You don't want to play this. Okay. No. That's maybe too far, but it's not going to save you against some of these Jin plays for sure.
But actually, Alcahest is going to be really good now against a particular new card we've seen, the Orb of Sealing.
Yes. Yep.
Which is going to be really mean against Rye. It's going to be disruptive to Slimes. It's a card that is going to... Orb of Sealing is a regalia that costs 0 that comes in and has rest this to choose 2 banished cards, flip them face down and put seal counters on them. So it's going to take all those Slimes that are banished and make them just cards. It's going to take all those arcane cards that are banished and make them just cards. So now Rye is going to want to find an Alcahest, and if he is kept a level, if he hasn't had all of his arcane cards banished yet, which is reasonably likely that that's the case, then he can activate that Alcahest to destroy the orb, which is great. Or if he is in a bad position, they like turn 2 orbed and just started going at you, which is not a bad plan, then he still can play that clutch arcane sight, get that +1 level, and then Alcahest the orb. And when the orb leaves, everything that has seal counter on it flips face up, yours and your opponent's, which is important for like slime mirrors and stuff too. Yep. So there's spicy metagame changing cards coming in here, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I mean, like Jin so we talked about his level 3 that gives him immortality. His level 1 and 2 as well are very aggressive. Like these are where Lorraine was like a warrior that's pretty general. She slots into a lot of different decks. She has kind of more mid-rangey decks. She's got a few aggressive decks. Obviously she can play some control-y games too. She just has a lot of flexibility. Jin's whole kit is just like, I'm going to beat your face in. Good luck.
Yep.
His inherited effect on his level 1, which is whenever Jin attacks with a polearm weapon and or polearm attack card, target horse or human ally you control gets +1 power until end of turn. Like on its face, that's, just +1 power, whatever. But like that's, every single turn. And then his level 2 also has a way that wakes him up. So when he has on enter, Jin's next attack this turn gets +1 power and has on attack wake up Jin. So now all of a sudden Jin gets to attack twice. That's +2 power for that turn. So just over the course of the game, like that inherited effect is going to add a lot of damage to your opponent. And like he just has a much more aggressive stat line than Lorraine does. Also, he is going to kind of flip some of these 2-3 allies on their head a little bit as well.
Thank you. I was going to say that.
From that inherited effect, like he just kind of like wins the ally mirror on his own. We might see some other spicy stuff. Like we've talked about, like you can still play Jin and Lorraine in the same deck, right? Because cleaves are still good, and he's also a warrior. And so like maybe you want to Lorraine level 2 some cleave homies or whatever, but like he might not even need that, because like his inherited effect just gives you +1 and says I'll have my 2-3 beat your 2-3 clean in combat, doesn't matter, make it go away. So
and Jin's ability to like Lorraine, we like Lorraine level 2 like you said for cleaving the board, but Jin has a little bit of savage swing. It's savage slash, but for polearms. Jin being able to use that, he has a polearm that on kill replaces a durability on it. So there's a really clean Jin combo you can do when you're facing a bunch of other 2-3 allies. You have your 2-3 ally in play, or you just play it that turn because you can do that after you have the polearm out. You savage swing with the polearm 1 ally, pump your 2-3 ally +1, and then you send your 2-3 ally into the other ally, and you've cleaned their board. You got a floating memory out of the deal, and you kept your 2-3 ally in play. And it's like he's got the potential to take those ally matchups and just like take control of them immediately in a way that Lorraine has a harder time doing necessarily unless she can hurricane sweep combo.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm expecting actually to see quite a bit of Jin in the beginning parts of the format. I think he'll be very well represented in Toronto as well. He's very powerful. Obviously Kong Ming is here now, and if I have anything to say about it, Kong Ming will make Terra playable. So I'm very excited for Kong Ming.
Kong Ming looks really good. She's going to be trickier for people to figure out. We talk about this every meta, but it's probably going to be Jin right away, like Taylor said, as people are trying to get the right Kong Ming lists together. But from everything I've seen with Kong Ming, I would be surprised if she isn't playable. I think she looks like she's got a lot of gas in her tank, under a number of different elements. Actually, we're looking at some pretty juicy endgame in multiple decks. We're looking at Wind Kong Ming that seems to have the ability to just answer anything with anything at any point in the game. That Bagua is going to be doing a lot of work for her, and there are some strong allies that she gets to play in multiple different elements. There are some crazy for both Jin and Kong Ming. There's some crazy advanced element cards. I feel like some of these Terra and Exia cards are just cracked. They're like, I don't know if they're quite Ghosts of Pendragon level, but like they're good.
They're Spell Shield Terra is insane. For Kong Ming, it's a 2-cost fast speed that prevents the next time your champion would take damage, and you reveal an amount of cards equal to that, and you put them into your material deck preserved. So like where Spell Shield Arcane was dope because it like let Rai draw like 1 card for every 3 damage she was going to take. Spell Shield Terra just almost says draw that many cards. I mean, you preserve them, so it's not quite the same. But
get them.
Actually, no, sorry. The comparison I used before was it's like a tutor. Like if Jin hits you for 19, right? You get whatever card you want from the top 19 cards of your deck for your next turn.
And for the rest of your turns of the game, you get to keep getting them.
Yes. It's pretty insane.
And Spell Shield Terra is one of the few tools that Silvie is actually going to get a hold of as well in this set. Slime Silvie is able to play Spell Shield Terra as a way to deal with other slime decks, for example, or Jin or something. So again, this deck, we're not saying it's a bad deck, right? Okay, Slimes is probably not going anywhere, but there's the matchup bracket, the matrix is going to start to get a lot more complicated now, I think.
Yeah.
And I think just generally, there are going to be so many choices. I think there are going to be lots and lots of choices for good decks to play. If we were already gushing about how actually good, despite what people want to believe, the metagame is right now, it's about to get nuts.
Yeah, it's going to be insane. Like, I mean, we said, I've claimed that Kong Ming won't be at Toronto. I don't actually know if that's true. On her face, her kit looks kind of fiddly. Very, like I've compared her to Arasana in my head in that she's kind of got like the shifting currents thing going on.
Yeah.
But her level 2, like shifting currents, I think is just more straight value for Kong Ming than potions were or herbs were for Arasana.
It is not. Like, it is not Arasana. It is not. Having played it, having played it and experienced this, even in that starter deck, actually, there's just a bunch of raw value that you can accumulate. It's like very different, actually.
Yeah, no. So I'm looking forward to trying that out and seeing where that takes me. I think she's going to have a lot of things going on. Like you said, like wind is going to be cool. There's that new card that pings a champion every single time you play a wind element card. That can kind of get out of hand pretty quickly when you're playing things like Fairy Whispers and the new Bagua and 3 visits, which lets you like play it 3 times for free, essentially for like no cost. Then of course, like the new tarot cards we already talked about. So like Kong Ming looks dope. I think also like, there's quite a few decks too that exist and are getting some new tools. Merlin and potentially Rye really like this new Empower mechanic. That helps a lot. So we might see them take up and play a bit.
They both like the new Divine Relic too.
Yeah. I you know what? I've got a pretty hot take for this Divine Relic, and I'm going to say it's mostly unplayable.
I think you're going to be wrong, and we'll have to see.
So I mean, it's like it's going to be playable in a deck where it's kind of like centerpiece, like it kind of like shores. It's like the linchpin of your deck, right? Because you always have kind of you have access to it. But I think it's going to be like kind of weird otherwise. Like Merlin might play it because you're already playing off element cards with Prismatic Edge. So like you can just get random value out of it. I think if we see more decks that have other ways to get random value out of it, it's fine. But we've already seen like how it's difficult to play dead cards in a deck. And so if you're playing dead cards just to activate one of the 1 or 2 or 3 of them on one turn, that's
how many game ending cards, Taylor, do you typically need to activate to win the game?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying, right? Like if it's a game ending thing, then absolutely you'll see play.
Yeah, and I think it'll largely get played either as a way to activate game ending cards. No. So what I'm thinking is I mentioned this in the video, but Fireball in non-fire Merlin decks is a very, very live play, I think.
Yep.
Merlin is able to make the time to be able to get the Divine Relic out and use it. Merlin doesn't actually actively need any of the Divine Relics right now anyway. Like Silvie's, like for example, Silvie deck is like Quicksilver Grail is so powerful in there that it's really hard to run something other than Quicksilver. But Merlin, the Ring, sure, but backup charger existing is what allows Ring to get pulled out of decks for cards like this. I think that's the really important thing that I think is going to play into how playable this is. But then Rye, this is an interesting thought that I haven't shared this too much yet, but Wind Rye was already a little competitive and for Rye decks, but now Wind Rye that gets to say, actually, I have 4 more kill conditions in my deck that I just need to find. And the only stipulation is if I find those ones, I have to activate this Divine Relic on my turn instead. Rye draws so many cards already. It's not really that important that he plays Grand Crusader's Ring. So actually just being able to play a deck that has the Arcane Elemental kill condition, the Arcane Blast kill condition, and Fireball kill condition consistently, actually maybe kind of good. So I see it as like a combo finish, which I think is really cool, right? But it's not going to be like a value piece that these decks are playing unless it's it's certainly value. It's not a value piece. But another thing that's going to be interesting, and this is something that our friends at True Champion Gaming talked about in their the Divine Relic review video. But one thing that this Divine Relic does is it means that if you can start to break, like, because no one expects you to play Temporal Spectrometer or whatever, so we're not playing around that. But if people start to play it sometimes in these deck lists, you're not always going to be able to know what outs your opponent has to certain situations, whether that be ways for them to finish the game, but also like maybe this is off the top of my head and maybe it's terrible, but like maybe water barrier is something that gets slotted into decks randomly. And you go, okay, well, my turn. I'm going to materialize this divine relic now. And now suddenly they're playing a fire deck and you're like, what do they have? Like, what are like, and you'll play into the like, oh, okay, water barrier. I got you. And like, oh, I thought I was going to kill you, but I could literally have never expected water barrier to be the thing that your fire deck is playing that counters my win condition right now or whatever. There's stuff like that that'll come up and gives that divine relic the potential to actually just kind of like mess with how people play the game on a fundamental level if it exists at all.
Yeah. This makes a lot of sense. This could really open up the metagame just in general. Also too, like allies in this set seem to have gotten a pretty big bump. We've seen a lot of cards that are just have increased stats. They're good allies. Like Go On You, right, is a 2/4 for 5, I think. Wind human ally, unique, that if a human died this turn, you can activate her for 2 or 3 less and at fast speed. And then she also has ambush and retort 2. And so what that means is ambush means she can retaliate no matter who the target of the attack is. And retort 2 increases her power by 2 for that retaliation. So she's hitting back for 4 at fast speed if like somebody's coming in at you with a bunch of different allies. So like, the 2/4 body on its own is very strong. Again, because it gets around the 2/2/3s that have been common. It gets around the Jin and 1/2/3 that we've been talking about as well. Makes like favorable wins look a lot better. So like we're seeing a lot of allies like that that have a lot of extra kind of oomph to them and really kind of give them a little bit more sticking power, a little bit more kind of utility in games. So we might be seeing while Jin could potentially be like the death of allies, we might be seeing a brand new iteration of allies as well. So a lot of kind of weird, fun things to see. I forget, Dan, do we see anything yet for something cool like Luxem or anything, Tristan, yet?
We've seen so far a lot of like the assassin cards we've seen have been maybe cards that are either tools against assassin. Like we've seen attacks that remove preparation counters and attacks with true sight and stuff that are they're cards that you see in those decks. But I don't know, and I'm not the world's foremost Luxem player either, but I don't know if there's anything has stood out to me as like a particular boon to Luxem, and especially not in the way that like Slice and Dice and Incapacitate were. But all Luxem is really looking for is just more efficient ways to either not die or to level while generating value. And if it just has to find more stuff like that to be happy with stuff. Yeah. So it's really like, it's not out of the question, right, to see some more stuff like that.
So yeah, I mean, like the format, I think moving forward after next week is just going to be like completely wide open. I think going into like Mercurial Heart, we had a pretty good idea of what it would look like. Basically a lot of what we'd already been playing plus the new Recollection decks. Right now, I think there's going to be a good amount of what we're already playing. I think there's going to be a lot of new stuff, and I think there's going to be some of the things we were playing are going to look. We might still be playing them, but they're going to look very significantly different. So I mean, just. It's gonna be a lot of fun getting ready for Toronto because I'm gonna have no idea where to start.
Yeah, and just looking way back a little bit at the MRC metagame, one of the initial things as MRC was coming out, like obviously we were like, okay, Slimes is good, Tristan's good. And just before I forget to mention too, I don't think anything's getting banned in Silvie. I don't think anything's getting banned in Silvie or Tristan.
No, I'd be incredibly surprised. I'd be incredibly surprised if anything got banned at all. I'd be a little surprised if something even got added to the watch list. Obviously, Erupting Rhapsody will be banned on October 11th, which is like really lame.
Finally defeating that menace of a deck.
Yep.
Had so many top cuts in the MRC season. It had right? But
I'm waiting. I mean, there's got to be a spoiler coming out somewhere where that just goes bonkers with it, right? Like
it could be, it could be. I mean, it's probably fine at this point. It kind of had its hurrah, but
yeah,
I just want to mention that like it's important. I think that the cards in the recollection decks are actually not banned as long as we're satisfied with their performance in the format and it's not overwhelming, which I think we made a pretty good case that it's not in this episode.
Yep.
The big boon for those decks is it's really great to hand your new players starter decks and be like, hey, come play locals. It'll be fun. They can have fun. But you can't really hand new players who are trying to get into the game, look into the game, a starter deck and expect them to go play in a store champs or regional or an Ascent and do anywhere close to good, have fun. Whereas both those decks, but especially the slime deck, are very forgiving, easy to jump into. And it's so easy to go, you know what, we got a regional coming up. I know you just learned the game, but I recommend you playing this. Just pick up this recollection deck and I'm going to teach you a few basic things. And you're probably not going to win, but you actually can win games and have fun with this. And you'll learn a lot. And that's like an important product to have in the lineup. And I think of all the things MRC brought to the game, that is one of the people aren't going to like to hear this, but that's one of the best things that it did is bringing Slimes and Tristan into the game as
100%. I mean, those are both decks. Like you said, you can say, hey, go pick up this deck. I'm going to lend you 4 of my dungeon guides. That is now a competitive deck.
Yep.
And 4 dungeon guides and a Quicksilver Grail probably.
Better put the Grail in and the guy's blessing.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's so easy to actually just upgrade those. And like, even if you don't want to go out and spend money on dungeon guides, which will be reprinted in a week, by the way, it's so easy to get people into the game with them that way. And you're exactly right. Like, as much as I hate Storm Slime, just like personally from a deep guttural kind of level, not even like talking about his power level or anything. It's really, really good that the format's in a spot where we don't even like want to ban that from a format health and fun perspective, because keeping those decks whole are really important for helping like these newer players come in and introducing them to the more competitive scene. Because like you said, like starter decks are awesome to pick up and kind of help someone learn the game, maybe even introduce them to locals that way, right? But it's also a much more difficult kind of launching point to start playing competitively. Like you've got to make a lot more adjustments to those decks to make them anything remotely close to playable. Whereas like both Silvie and Tristan are like ready to go out of the box.
Yep.
It's incredibly important we keep those kind of whole and available for newer players.
But then just like looking back at what else MRC brought to the game, the big new deck that we actually saw from MRC, other than Tristan and Silvie, was Automaton Allies. Taylor, you remember Lorraine with a gun? You remember our excitement about Lorraine bringing out a gun and stuff? That deck's just gone. Like nobody's like the Wind Ally decks do get played a little bit, but it's not even always the Automaton list that gets played now, especially when people started heavily sideboarding reprogram or even mainboarding reprogram. And that deck trying to drop an Andronica or something and getting reprogrammed in response was like, it was really hard to come back from that value.
I think the lasting kind of impression from the Automaton deck was that people started playing like Second Wind more. Like even as they dropped the Automatons, they kept Second Wind in or Rallied Advance, kind of depending on what they wanted. They didn't go all in on all 8 copies to combo with like power cells and stuff, obviously, but like it's been shown to be a really valuable tool, and that's kept its spot in the deck so far. And I expect that to be the case too. And I expect Jin to make very good use of those cards, actually.
Second Wind in Jin is kind of spicy too.
Yeah, it's pretty busted. Attack with Jin, give your ally power from his effect. Second Wind that ally, gets that power from that Second Wind as well. So now it's got like extra bonus. It's also attacked with the other bonus. So it's just bonus on bonus on bonus on bonus on bonus. You can start doing a lot of damage really quickly.
Yeah. So that Automaton deck is kind of gone, and that's a little unfortunate because I do like that was the one like really Mercurial Heart themed deck that made sense, even if people very quickly stopped playing the Divine Relic Mercurial Heart also. I'll just say that one of my hopes in the future though is for perhaps some sort of either a Recollection deck or just a side Lineage Break character, like a champion at some point that like has a built-in sort of automaton tribal support in the same way that Slime Silvie exists, so that we can we can maybe start to get some of those cards brought back in as like a variant of allies or a different, or maybe the Overlord themed decks or something that are really fun. Make that a little more playable. It'd be nice to get that back in the meta, because that's the one thing that just kind of like fell off and felt like Mercurial Heart's impact. The set itself wasn't as big. It's like it had backup charger, and that's huge. And then a lot of other Mercurial Heart cards are a little more niche.
I mean, you're really kind of forgetting about Nico here, which is a deck you were gushing about.
No, you're right.
So.
Nico, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, Nico, Ravishing Finale and Fractal of Rain are huge, obviously, for Nico. No, they thank you. That's true. That's true. Not a ton outside of that, though, I think, right?
Yeah, for the most part. We might see some more of them, some more MRC cards pop up here too, as like there's a lot of mage cards that really didn't have a home from MRC.
Retold Fortune, a card we both really like, which is really, we talked about last episode, but I think it's going to have a lot more application in set 4 or set 5 from everything we've been seeing.
Some of these Ranger cards too might get a little bit more applicable depending on the Ranger support in Mortal Ambition.
We're seeing some good Ranger stuff. We're seeing some interesting Ranger stuff coming down the pike, so certainly possible too.
Yep. So I think every deck, every arc or every class is getting a little something here that really could pop it up into like high tier formats here. So.
And the decrees were huge.
And the decree. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff from MRC.
All right. No, so, MRC is good. Never mind.
Yeah,
take it all back.
It didn't necessarily spawn like a ton of brand new archetypes or anything, right? But it brought a lot of cards to the format that are being used and played heavily. It did spawn Nico and give her the push she needed to see it play, and really has impacted the format quite a bit. So,
and Polcock didn't quite get there, although we had fun with that deck right away. But Vanitas, I think, one of the biggest rogue decks of the MRC format. We talked about that Vanitas deck that was tearing up a regional recently. Second place in the regional was like really impressive, and I think in AMB that deck's only going to get better too. I think people are going to finally get on board and start trying it and liking what they see.
Yeah, that deck is going to be kind of a beast, actually, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see more MRC cards coming, but more Mortal Ambition cards that are going to be blowing our minds here when we get the full spoiler shortly, and then more MRC cards that are going to grow in value. And all of so many previous decks and champions. Like, this is going to be such a great format, Taylor, and I can't wait.
Yep. Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. My move actually is this weekend instead of next, so that I can be done with this and I can just focus all in on Mortal Ambition, just go ham. So
yes, let's go.
So thank you everyone for listening. This has been the Recollection Step. I hope this was a fun kind of look back at the format and kind of at Singapore and all the good times we had along the way. We're gonna have some really good times here. We'll be back in 2 weeks, assuming that I'm not neck deep in Mortal Ambition cards, and we're gonna talk about kind of winners and losers, initial winners and losers of the format, and kind of did Merlin get really good now? Did this blow up our sweet Diana lists? Is Arasana playable? Spoiler alert, probably not.
We'll at least be talking about the jank decks that we tried in the first week or two of the format. Whether or not they're winners or losers, it makes us all winners to play with fun cards.
Yep. So we'll see y'all again in 2 weeks, and have fun out there.
Bye, everyone.